what I'm interested primarily in is your mother, because you were home much more than Ma was, my mother, and she left home and was away for so long. And I'm not interested in, I mean, there isn't something in particular, but just in general. But before I start on that, I was wondering whether or not you were ever told or ever overheard your father and mother, either one, talking about the move out here to North Dakota. Did you ever hear them talk about that at all? Can you tell me, give me some idea of what?
Well, Dad came before Mother, you know.
Right.
You knew that. After Johnny was born, a few months old, she came. That's why she waited back there until Johnny was born. So.
Well, was Richard, were Richard and Adele living on a farm in Minnesota at the time?
They sold it.
They actually owned the farm in Minnesota?
They owned the farm. Didn't they sell that anymore? Isn't that the one he bought?
I don't know. I haven't had a chance to check from it anymore. Why did they come to North Dakota?
He wanted a homestead. He homesteaded 80 acres. He bought a quarter. And they were through and then in a few years, let's see now how. I was born in January. In the spring he moved down in this area.
And which farm did he move to?
Charles Roosing place.
Okay.
When he left there, he sold this quarter of land, or maybe he sold it all. No, I'm not sure on that. He sold the 80. Maybe sold it all. I don't know. Anyway, the quarter and 80, he sold this to a knifer, a fellow by the name of Philip Knifer.
Well, do you know why they came to North Dakota? I mean, wasn't there farmland available in Minnesota? Maybe not for homesteading,
no,
but for
not
purchase?
for homesteading. That's why he came up and filed.
The idea of getting free land.
Filed on a claim, or however they called it. Okay.
I see. How did he come when he came? Did he just come literally by himself without bringing anything but, say, money?
Just himself, his cattle. He loaded a train, you know, in Minnesota. With cattle, a couple cows, some chickens, and horses, so he could get. The time he got to Drake, they condemned his horses. They had to distemper. They told him he didn't dare move them any farther. That was at Drake. He got up in the middle of the night, 1 o'clock, unloaded his horses. He knew how far it was to his homestead. Unloaded his horses, loaded his chickens, a couple cows, and he struck out in the middle of the night. Otherwise, they were going to do away with. They'd killed a lot of horses at that time. That's what he thought would happen. So he had head for his homestead from Drake, North Dakota, across the prairies.
How far was that?
That must have been about 35 miles in that area.
And was he just driving his livestock, or did he have a wagon?
He had a wagon. He had a wagon. He hitched the horses to it. He tied everything and went. Threw the chickens in a crate and went.
Did he come alone?
He often talked about that. He came all alone at that time. And but later on, there's a fella came from Minnesota and stayed with him.
Oh, he will.
By the name, okay.
We'll get into that. Is that August?
That was Hilger something.
Evidently he made it to where he was, in his trip from Drake, he made it to the farm.
Yeah.
Now, was there something on the farm already built, place to live?
Nothing, just land.
Just land. What did he do? What did he do then when he had to?
They had some. I don't know. I remember him saying they got a hold of some old lumber, and first thing they did is to shack up the house. And that's what you see here. It was only 2 rooms, then they added a lean on. Now that's how I remember it. And from there on, then he built it. His livestock stuff could stay out, you know.
Well, did he do that himself as well?
Well, I guess some of the neighbors, they helped. There were others in the same position he was in, and they were a little there sooner. And some of his the Bowers, I know he mentions them. We all came over and they helped us. It was no time we had this shack up.
What?
Because they had to get it up for the mother to come with the baby, the kids.
Right. But they would have had to build, or they would have had to, they couldn't just let the livestock roam around. They would have had to build fencing or something.
Yeah, I suppose they, somehow, yeah, that part.
Mm.
But, you know, it only took days for them, and they got together, and that's the way Dad talks. It didn't take them long. He says, not like nowadays. We just got that up in a few days. And then they started taking care of the stock. You know, they only had a couple cows or whatever it was, a few chickens.
Huh.
Even the chickens could stay in the crate for a little while. You know how it is. They started from bottom. There was nothing. Well, that's
Did he come over with any, or out here with any sort of savings at all? Did he have money in his pocket when he came?
No, I tell you, it couldn't have been very much because, Willie died. Got sick. He went to the banker. Drake had never met him. Asked him if he'd loan him $16 to bury.
How much?
$16.
$16.
To bury Willie. So he couldn't have had much. And
No, I guess not.
So, but I don't just know the time.
Well,
what time elapsed in that time?
Right.
You know.
How long was it before your mother then came out?
About 2 months. Johnny was about 2 months old, they say.
If Johnny was 2 months old, and how much before that had Richard left to come out to North Dakota?
See, he came early spring. He wanted to put the crop in yet. He wanted to do some breaking or whatever.
Yeah.
I remember him saying that. So they left early spring. Now, just what month? I presume last February, March, maybe.
And Johnny was born
in May.
In May.
Part of 14th of May. And she came over. They always said he was about 2 months. Now the exact time, I don't know.
So there must have maybe been five.
She
must
came
have
in
been
the
five,
summer. Yeah.
5, 6 months had passed. How did she get out here?
By train.
By train.
That's the way I understand it.
And again, she just came along?
With the 2 little kids. Well, see, Willie was born, and then Johnny. Because then after that, the next spring, then Henry Rapp came out, you know. And his mother was even with him, wasn't she? They came in an old car of some kind. And he also homesteaded, but he gave it up, you know.
Well, there was there were more people homesteading right out here in this particular area than
South
I had realized. Right, there was
Uncle Klaus and Lena came out too.
They homesteaded. Carl Rapps homesteaded out here. Hartfield's homestead.
Zenther, what didn't Zenther too?
They could have, but well, that wouldn't be a relative.
No, but I mean, they were from that area anyway.
Right, Carl Rapp's first wife was Zenther. Probably why they came out. Did your mother ever talk about what it was like when she first got down on the farm after coming from Minnesota to see what Richard had built?
It really was. She often talks how hard it was.
Really?
You know, because there was nothing. Even when the kids were so sick then that time, she often talked about that. They only could have been where they could have gotten a doctor. You know, they had to get the doctor out of. Drake came to Butte. Dad had to go there with the wagon and get him from.
Yeah. They were hard times, weren't they?
Boy, were they ever. Yeah, I know she often talked about that.
Did your mother enjoy living on the farm, you think?
Oh, yeah, I think.
Was she happy there?
Oh, yeah. I would say that. She liked the outdoors.
And how did that, the fact that she liked the outdoors, how did that show itself? Were there certain activities that she did?
I mean, she was right beside Dad, although she plowed, you know, left the kids sitting in the end of the furrow, and she went out and did her plowing. Every round she came back with the horses, she'd move them or see where they were, how they were. If she wouldn't have liked it, she wouldn't have if she wasn't a willing mate, you know what I'm talking about.
Right.
Okay. So she was really right out there. Gardening, everything, her milking, she was always on. Outdoors. They couldn't have made it if she wouldn't have
No, I
been.
don't suppose. Were there certain things that she was solely responsible for? Do you remember? Not necessarily in the very first years, but even later on, within your memory.
I don't know just what you mean there.
Maybe besides the obvious things like cooking and clothes and that sort of thing. Was the garden her?
Oh yeah, responsibility.
She had to take care of that.
Mm-hmm. Of course, look, I think I would say the care of the children, family, especially with her load with Johnny. You know, he didn't walk till he was 8 years old.
No, I didn't know that.
Didn't you know that? Oh,
no.
She was helping Johnny walk, and she was carrying by at the same time.
Tell me what you know about Johnny's early years. And
well, of course, he had the same thing this brother died of. So the doctors tell us now. And I suppose you've often heard the story about them putting him in the oven and keeping him warm and rubbing his back until. But now
well, tell me again, though.
Well, he was dead. The doctor left and said Willie had just died. And then the doctor said, and then they had to take the doctor to catch the train at Drake to get back. He took him to Butte to catch the train to Drake, and he said, well, now Willie the baby's gone, the baby's going to die too. He said, no need for him to hang around here, he'd miss that train. So Grandpa then took him. But while he was gone, and then Mother just sat there. Of course, you can imagine what that was like, with those two, one child dead and the other one dying. So when Dad came back, she ran out and she says, there's still life, the baby's still living. So Dad grabbed him and rubbed his back, and they had, what did they do? Heat with only oven, you know, held him close to the oven, kept him warm, and he came to. And from then on, he gradually got a little better and better, but he couldn't walk. Anyway, he didn't walk. He really didn't walk decent until he was about 8 years old, they said. In the meantime, because Vi was quite a girl already.
Yeah.
So she would.
Well, why was that he couldn't walk? I mean,
it was like a paralysis. The doctor said that's why his mind was affected. It was a form of a paralysis. That's what they tell him now when he was in Rochester. His brain was partly paralyzed.
Oh. And that was brought on by this illness?
From this illness.
What were
they called it a severe flu at that time. You know, they didn't know. They said you got.
Well, what were the symptoms of that illness? I mean, was it real high fevers?
Yeah, very high. They went into convulsions.
Oh.
Willie went into convulsion, never came out of it. And Johnny went in one convulsion after the other, but he always came out of it, which, of course, affected his mind. So.
How old was Johnny at the time?
Think about that too. Johnny must have been 6 months, maybe?
6 months.
Something like
that. Would Johnny have been perfectly normal if he hadn't have gotten that illness, do you think?
That's what the doctors in Rochester say now. They took him to this other woman too. She's supposed to read through the eyes, you know how they do. She looked at his eyes and she said, oh, that boy's had convulsions and he was a baby. She left his mind.
Well, that's the old German doctor in Bismarck?
The same that's the one you went to. That's right. Well, she's the one that told him that. Without us even telling her a thing. That's the first thing she said.
Is it?
It's the convulsions that caused this brain damage, put it that way. So.
What time of the year did all this happen? The doctor had come out by train. Was it, and he had to get back, was it winter time?
It seemed to me Dad would always say, I got him out with a sled.
With a sled?
So evidently it must have been winter time.
Let's see. I'm going to switch tracks a little bit. If your father talked about coming out to North Dakota, did he ever talk about anything before that? Coming over? I know he was very young at the time, but did he ever repeat things that he had heard from Germany that he had heard from his father? Right. Mm-hmm. Did he ever talk about that, either first or second hand? About the trip over from Germany, or anything about Germany?
He always talked, the only thing I can recall about the trip, they all got so sick. Dad said he was so sick and he couldn't eat. And that's all I can remember about the trip, you know.
Mm-hmm. Did he ever talk about after the trip? How did they get from New York to wherever it is they went?
Well, didn't they? Oh, they were in Milwaukee, weren't they?
But they came into New York originally.
And then they went to Milwaukee. That's where they were aiming to go anyway.
How did they get to Milwaukee?
That I don't know either. I just don't know that either.
Why did they go to Milwaukee?
Wasn't there a relative? Some relative?
I don't know. I have heard.
Maybe friends or relatives. Someone there that drew them to Milwaukee. But now, who? I just can't say that either.
Do you know why they went to Minnesota then? If they had friends or relatives in Wisconsin, why did they come to Minnesota?
I don't know that either. That I wouldn't know either.
Did your father ever talk? Did your father and mother ever talk about how they happened to meet?
Yeah, let's see. I guess I don't think about that one. I don't know, but it was all through some kind of a party where Aunt Lena and Uncle Klaus, they were already going together, or knew each other. Shall I put it that way?
Mm-hmm.
Put it that way. And it's through some, I don't know, house party or something. That's all I can recall. Dad saying something like that.
Hmm.
Because of Aunt Lena and Uncle Klaus, of course, then there was the other two too, you know.
Right.
Well, they were the last ones married.
Your father?
Uncle
Emil, yes, right. Did they know each other long before they got married? Your parents?
No, I don't think so. I don't think so. But I wouldn't know definitely. But it wasn't a long period.
Mm-hmm. Were your parents similar? Do you think that's why they might have been attracted to each other, because they had a lot in common? Or was it that they didn't have so much in common and opposites attract?
I don't know how I should answer that. As far as education, neither of them had amount to anything as far as that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
One wasn't educated more than the other. But Dad was the ambitious kind. Well, he could read or write English, you know, or anything. He did that all by himself.
You mean he never learned enough in school to read and write English?
He went to German school. And he never learned to read and write until when they came out to the homestead, is when he first really tried reading the English language.
Oh.
He said he had it awfully hard.
How did he, do you know how he managed to teach himself reading and writing?
He said he bought books. I remember him saying that. I got myself just these common first grade books. And that's how he started to learn.
Do you know whether he had any help at all?
Just by himself, he said.
Nobody helped him?
He would ask questions, you know, and things, but other than that, he says, I studied every day. He was interested. He could read German real well, but he couldn't decipher some of the American language. But he did that by himself. Mother, of course, was confirmed in German, too. Mother only went to the third grade.
Was it true of your mother, or was it true of your father? And that could she read and write English?
She wasn't as ambitious to learn it as Dad was. She wrote letters, things like that, but that's the extent of it.
I see.
But Dad would dug into it. He was always on some committees or something, and he really studied to get it.
Oh.
No, there was that difference between the two. Mother cared just to get along with, but Dad was different. He dug into this thing.
How about personality-wise? Were they a good match that way?
Oh, I would say.
Um,
Dad was a very good provider, you know.
how about, but is it fair to say that Richard was very outgoing and
Oh yeah,
really
much.
enjoyed being around people and having a good
Mother
time?
was more the quiet type.
She was. Her personality was
No,
was more
different that way.
quiet. Oh. That's interesting.
So,
If your father took all that trouble to learn to read and write English, then he must have had quite a high regard for education.
he did. Well, when you think about it, when Violet was ready for high school, boy, he wouldn't let her stay home for anything. You know.
Why is that? I mean, there weren't there high schools.
No,
I see. Okay.
no. See,
I see.
she went to Bismarck where she could be with Aunt Minnie.
That's right.
They didn't have the funds, you know, to.
You mean if she wanted to say quit school after the 8th grade and stay on the farm?
He wouldn't have allowed that. He wanted.
Really? Why do you think that was?
Because he thought it was necessary, I suppose. Better life. Well, you know what it is not to have an education. You try. He went through that. I think he could see it for that reason.
Was that true with you too?
Oh yeah, he was bound that we should all go. He wanted Walter to go so bad too.
To go through what?
School, high school, and go on.
Did Walter go through high school?
No, school was awfully hard for Walter.
Is it? How far did Walter go?
8th grade.
8th grade.
I don't even know if he completed really the exams at the end. It was awfully hard for him.
It was. But you completed.
I went through my junior year. Then we got hailed out. Absolutely in everything. I had to board out, you know, then. I went to Velma. Across your boarding room. I finally said to Dad, I'll go working. I says, I just won't expect you to. So I went to business college then. I worked mine.
Oh.
I went into business college, night school.
What did you take up there?
Stenographer, shorthand, typing. So, I did.
What did you have in mind when you went on to school like that? I mean, did you have plans?
I wanted to go on.
Of having a career in something?
I always liked bookwork.
You did?
And that's what my plans were. Till I got married, of course, I spoiled it all.
Well, changed something.
Yeah, changed something. Put it that way.
Were you in Bismarck at the same time as my mother?
No, but she was working at the store at Benedict, I think.
Oh, Benedict.
She had quit teaching.
Oh, that's right. How did you find business college?
I liked it. I liked it very much, but it was hard. I worked for Aunt Minnie half a day. I went and worked for Montgomery Ward's store in the afternoon to buy my books and rent a typewriter, what have you. In the evening, I went to night school till midnight. So it wasn't a very easy role.
How long were you there doing that?
I went for the summer session, a quarter in the summer, 3-4 months or whatever. And then the reason I left Bismarck was that Mother was having the thrashers that fall. It was hard for her. She had a whole rig, 32 men to cook for. She asked me if I would come home and help her on this as well.
When you were in Bismarck going to school, how many different classes did you take?
Shorthand, typing, and bookkeeping.
Bookkeeping. So you had 3 different classes.
I went from 8 to 12.
Was it a different class every evening, or was it 3 different classes
No,
for
we
an
had
hour?
split them up. I know I typed only twice a week, but I had to do home practice.
Mm.
So that's how I filled that in. And that way, we were supposed to have them every day. But I filled in, I just couldn't handle the job and the housework and that. So I did the practicing at home.
What kind of a job did you have at Montgomery Wards?
I was a sales clerk.
What did you get paid?
Boy, it wasn't very much. I remember that because I tried to buy clothes out of that on top of it. But gee, to tell you right down to the dollar, I couldn't.
Remember the size of your paycheck at the end of a week?
I don't know. Some 12 rings a bell, but I don't know where that was supposed to fit.
$12 a week, maybe?
Something like that rings a bell, and I worked there only in the afternoons.
All right.
So I don't know if that actually was for the week or what, but that rings a bell.
Were you able to get discounts there to buy your clothes and things? If you
if you did that, if you had money to buy your clothes, that's also the problem.
Yeah. That's true.
It was tough.
And
see, I did washing for Mr. Butler at the bank. I did his laundry on the sideline and ironed all those white shirts to help myself along too.
And he paid you for that?
So much a shirt, 50 cents I think a shirt.
50 cents?
50 cents a shirt. And then I said, oh, that's pretty much, isn't it? And then he said, he's just doing that to help you. So I just washed, ironed, and starched, and did that in the evenings. It was a lot of fun.
How did your morning go with the Harrisons?
I did the housework. I was doing all the housework. I got the meals prepared.
You fixed the meals?
I had to get everything ready for the supper meal. So they did all the laundry, and there was no washing machines either. You did that by hand. We rubbed all those clothes for those kids.
How many children were there?
Not the 3 boys and Joyce, Aunt Minnie and Aunt Adele. See, there was Buster and Joe and Dick, Joyce, and the 2 grown-ups. Did all that washing by hand.
I'm trying to get my bearings. Joe Harrison wasn't living at the time.
No, he was dead. He died when Joyce was a baby.
Right, that's right. And what year would that have been that you were down there, going to school, and working for them?
34, I think.
1934. Did you get along well with them?
All right, no problem. Really enjoyed that. It was tough work, but they were really good to me. I can see that. Of course, Aunt Adele was Aunt Adele. You knew her too.
Was Aunt Adele, was she consistent throughout her life as far as her personality and
so.
aggressiveness?
She's always been there. I know all the maids that used to come to the house that I talked to previously there. They got along just fine. They didn't mean it, but she's right, And she was something else. She'd come home, and if she'd see if I had the dusting, she'd go up above someplace and wipe and see, did she dust up here today? That's Aunt Adele. So, but Aunt Minnie was altogether different.
When did they move to California then? Was it long after you had left there?
Joyce was Joyce 16 or 17.
And when you were there working, how old was Joyce then?
She was a 3rd grader, I think.
3rd grade. Okay. I see.
So, and Walter Zimmerman had just gone to college in Minneapolis. The year that I left there, he'd just gone. He was going the year I worked there. He came home for Christmas on vacation. I remember that. I'm sure that's how it was.
You ever wish that you would have been able to stick it out there and finish your time in school?
Oh, I suppose it would have been to my advantage, of course, but I'm not saying that I'm sorry, you know, the
Right.
big things. After you've got your own family and you see their success, you know,
Right.
then you can't say I'm sorry. But I did like it. I liked
What? It was a little unusual, really, wasn't it, that your father, and I guess your mother too, saw the value of education. It seems like, I know I've talked to a lot of people whose experience spans the same time, and it was typically what I hear is that their parents saw no reason to go past learning to read and write and letting it go at that. Just a second. Was and Adele felt that education was so important.
essential. They both felt that way. I know mother could have used me, you know, stayed home and helped her. No, she just would rather do it alone. And they both were that way. Yeah, it's necessary.
I still can't quite understand, or well, I'm just not sure why that would be, other than I know Richard had a tough time and had no education. He seemed to realize that it was important in spite of that. But a lot of people had that same problem. They started out with nothing and farmed and worked hard, but still didn't see the value of an education.
Dad always says, boy, what we went through, you kids can have it better. You know, he says, you go on ahead. He was much for it.
Were you aware of anyone else within his generation, in or out of the relationship, who felt the same way? And was there anyone else who agreed with them and said, yes, my kids are going to get some schooling so they can get a better situation than I have?
No, all I can recall, you know, Zinthers used to live here. I don't suppose you ever knew Albert Zinther.
Albert? No.
But now Ethel was in my grade, and I can recall this, that when Dad says, you go to high school, she didn't. And I remember Albert saying, oh, they'll get married anyway, what's the use? I can remember that so well, and Ethel never did go. And we were real close friends.
Did she have any brothers?
Ethel Zinther? Edwin.
Did he go to school?
No.
So his father felt the same way for him as well?
I presume, yeah.
That's interesting.
He's still living in Turtle Lake. No, neither one of them went, but I know Dad was insistent we go. So.
I see. Do you remember Julius Koebernick at all?
Who?
Julius Koebernick.
Grandpa. I don't remember him very well, but I do remember we went to see him one time. Alexandria. He lived in Alexandria. No, I was just a kid. I don't know how old I was. But I always said he reminded me of Dad a lot. I can recall that I always said Dad was like Grandpa. And I was just small. I remember that. Other than that, I don't know. He was so kind-hearted, I thought. That's all I can remember about him. We were there, you know, so a lot of times kids would be in somebody's way, not in Grandpa's. I can remember that as a kid. Other than that, I didn't know.
Did your father ever talk about his father?
Well, many times. But I wished I knew some of the things he said now, and he often talked about. And about the second marriage, I remember him talking about that. So
What were his feelings on the second marriage?
he felt so sorry for Grandpa.
He did. Why was that?
Well, I don't know. They said she was so mean to him. I don't know now whatever that meant. He just either had told a mark or it was just too bad for Grandpa. But what the details involved, I don't know. I remember him saying that so often.
Was your father at all... Do you know whether he actively tried to keep him or talk your father out of getting, or his father out of getting married?
Yeah, I heard that remark one time too. Now, who I ever heard that from? I don't know if it was. I don't know, but I've heard that. Dad say that. I told Dad not to marry her, that he would get involved or whatever. Maybe he knew the family. Maybe that's why. I don't know, but I can recall Dad saying that.
Did you think that Richard held his father in high esteem?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah, that he did. His
In
mother too.
In what ways could you tell that?
The way he talked, I guess. The hard times they went through and what all Grandpa hadn't accomplished. I don't know, but I know that it sure gave me that impression. And his mother, he was so sickly, and he always talked about her.
Did he, did they have keepsakes from their parents that they kept around the house, or something to remind them of that?
Yeah, I don't know.
Photographs?
He had photographs of Grandpa. With his second marriage, I can remember that picture, wherever it is. I don't know, I know that. Maybe he's in with my things. Other than that, I don't know, really. Wedding picture, their wedding pictures, Grandma and Grandpa.
He did have that. Julius's now. Richard had a copy of their wedding picture. Did Richard ever talk about his mother, other than she was sickly?
Yeah, he often said. Yeah, he talked about her a lot. I don't just know what to tell you there. He felt sorry, of course, for her. She was so sick, and the kids would bake the bread, and he would bake bread for her. She was always in bed, but he sure had a heart for her. I know that, because he often talked that way. I don't know specifically anything, you know.
Do you? It sounds like your father was really quite attached to his parents.
Oh yeah.
What about your mother? Do you think that she was as attached to her parents as Richard
I think
was?
they were close.
Was it? Of course, they died much earlier.
Oh yeah. Well,
the
Grandma
father
Rapp was
did, I
out
should
here
say.
with us, you know.
Yeah, right. The father, John, did.
Mm-hmm.
Did you? You say she was out here. Do you remember her being out here?
Yeah. The only thing I can remember, I was pretty small. She was so terribly big, or fat, or helpless, or put it that way. She slept upstairs. I'll never forget this. And she couldn't get out of bed alone. Grandpa always had to try and help her out of bed. I don't know if she was sickly or just that big. I don't. They always said she was so big. So he put a hook up in the ceiling with the rope so that she could grab this rope, and she helped herself. After that, he says, "We'll fix it." I could see Dad saying that. And she got up herself. She'd pull on this rope, and she reached the rope, and she could get out of bed. I never forgot that. So she was quite a helpless person that way, you know, to get around.
Yes. Do you remember her as having some sort of breathing problem?
That I don't know. Okay. Maybe that was her problem. I don't know. But I know they said she couldn't get out of bed. She was so big, she couldn't help herself.
Did she stay long?
She spent one summer, several months. That's all I can remember.
In those early years, did you have many visitors?
Not really. It would be really something if somebody could get out here, you know. Well, the same with us, you know. You didn't get there like you do nowadays.
Yeah.
I remember our first trip out, I'll never forget it. Went to the old Model T Ford. In the middle of the night, we had no lights. And Dad says, well, we're stuck. I can't go any farther. We can't see. We were on the railroad track. We got stalled on the railroad track. I'll never forget that. So then old Dad says, we can't see. It's pitch dark. There's no moon out. We'll just have to push the car off the track and stay for the night. So we all slept in the car for the night. I'll never forget that either.
Where were you headed at that time?
Parker's Prairie, going to Uncle Bill's.
Any idea?
And it took us 2-3 days to make it.
2 or 3 days. And the roads probably weren't so good those days, were they?
No, how we ever got on that track? We were on a prairie trail. I can remember that. And Dad was trying to follow us. It was getting dark. I don't know. Those old cars didn't have lights, I guess.
I suppose not.
Magnetos, they called. They were on them, and when that was gone, you didn't have lights. Oh, that's what this happened. So.
Yes.
It's quite something. Of course, Henry Rapp, he came out here, you know. He stayed with us for a long time. You knew that for years. He came out.
Well, there's a lot of things I've heard, but there's a lot I haven't heard. Just assume I don't know anything. I don't.
Well,
I knew he was out here.
Then his mother, they all came out. They homestead. They were out by the homestead too. But they gave it up and went back. It was just too hard. But then after Henry was back a couple of years, he came. He opened this pool hall. What they called a pool hall was, you know, a shooting game. And that's what he did. And then he stayed with us ever since.
What, in those early years, did you ever hear how much your father and what your father planted for crops? In those early years out here, before you were born?
I don't know, but as far as acreage, I don't know. He had 8 acres the first year, I know. You know, then he sold that quarry. He lost that. He never did get his money for that.
Yeah, can you tell me all about that? I'm not quite sure I understand.
He started on 80 acres. The first they dug all the rocks that first year. And they did plant a few acres, so it wasn't very much. He said it was hardly enough for chicken feed for the winter. But then he bought this quarter the next year after he'd been here. And he broke that all up with horses and dug all the rocks. And that could have been 3 or 4 years. He was up there when he got this land down here, and he had a chance to sell that to a Philip Knifer. And he thought, well, with that money now, I'll get started down here. And he never did. They never did pay him.
Well, then how did he manage to hold on to what was down here if he didn't get his money?
He was just lucky that he, the owner that he bought from was retired. He was well situated. And he said, I'll just give you time. So he did. He took every year by year, he paid a little bit. And if he wouldn't have bought from this retired fellow that really had it already made, you know, he'd have never held it because he had none. But he lost everything there. So. I was born in January, and then we moved down here in the spring, early spring, last of March, maybe. Of course, and he rented that for 10 years.
The roosing place.
Until he bought up here.
He rented the roosing place. What about the paper business?
And that was after.
That was after
Walter got married and settled there. Then he bought the paper farm.
Richard bought the paper farm. So the sequence is the old farm when he first came out, rented and then bought the roosting place.
But before he left the roosting place, he bought 80 acres. We still have that today.
Oh.
That was the only land he really owned, was this 80 acres. and then he rented. And with this 80 acres he had a chance to buy that. After a few years, then he was able to put a down payment on that 80 acres. And then he moved up and bought up there.
And that farm belonged to
Schmidt. Fred Schmidt.
And then once Walter got married, you're saying that Richard bought the Papy place down here, where Richard is now, Richard Marschner.
Dad bought the Papy place.
And did he move down there?
Mm-hmm. They only lived together a couple of months, and he bought this federal land bank, and then they moved down here.
Yeah. Well, was this considered, the Papy farm considered a better piece of property than the Schmidt farm up in the hill?
Not really better, I don't think. It was just available. You know, the Bank of North Dakota had it for song.
Why did Richard move out instead of Walter?
Well, Dad hadn't planned. He had planned even to retire in town, not to stay. You know, and that little piece of land he figured he could take care of. Let most of the work for Walter and all the cattle. So he had all the cattle up there.
How many acres were down here?
2/4, I think he bought.
And up here he had, at Schmidt's place, he had how many?
Of course, he had 400 acres of broke land, but then he had a lot of pasture. I don't know just what that involved. It was really a cattle farm, and that's why he thought Walter could take the cattle. Younger, you know.
Sure.
So.
Interesting.
Then that's where he got hurt too. He got hurt up at that place.
When as early as you can remember, what language was spoken in the home?
Well, of course, we learned German too. We all understood it. I understand very well, but I can't speak it fluently. But I know after we start school, of course, whenever they want us to understand, well, then they would talk it. But we were taught the German language. They used it a lot because of Johnny. Johnny could understand the German language better than we could. But of course, gradually after we started going to school, and things.
But did your parents normally speak it between themselves?
Oh yeah, in the early years, I remember that.
Did the Koebernicks and the Rapps both speak the same dialect of German?
I think so. But Dad spoke both high and low.
And your mother?
Mother too.
Mother did too.
But they spoke the Low German between themselves the most. And I think Henry and Rapp did too, if I recall that. Because when they went visiting with other Germans that spoke High German, they could talk it just as well. But between the two, I know they spoke Low German. And
as time went on, did they stop speaking German?
Sort of. When we all went to school, it just gradually. Yeah. Then now the later years, I very seldom heard German.
Do you think that did your parents want you to be fluent in German? I mean, did they have a sense of pride in the fact
language.
that the old language?
Oh yes, because I can remember this. We used to go to German services. Boy, we sat through that German service, and then in English, an hour in for the English. And Dad always said, "You take your hymn book and you learn to read that way," and that is the truth. I can read many words just because I learned through singing hymns. That was his.
I asked whether your father had heard anything from his father in regards to the trips over from the old country. What about your mother? Did you ever hear her talking about things that she had heard from her parents?
Not as much. No. really
Not much.
can't say.
Did your mother talk about her parents at all?
Oh yeah, she told him. She talked about him, but not just, any specific thing. I can't. I can't just say.
That's fine. Okay, let's just jump ahead a little ways for something more specific. Can you describe for me what it meant to your mother when the harvest time came along? How did her routines change once the threshing had started?
Well, I don't know just what you mean by that, but.
Well, you mentioned before that they had 32 men. That would certainly make a difference in her.
That was really should we say, the highlight of the year for her too, because if she wasn't involved, it wouldn't.
Well,
she had to get involved. That was their means of support.
So how did she? What was her role in the harvest? At harvest time, what did she have to do?
Well, I don't know if you mean the harvest itself or when
any
the threshing.
Part of it.
Okay, when Mother used to go out shocking. Those days they shock grain. She was out there just like Dad would get on that binder. She would shock all the time allowed. When it was time for her to go in with the kids, she'd go in with the kids. She was right with him.
In these earlier years, he didn't have a hired man.
No.
What happened? What about then when it was time to thresh? Where did these crews come from?
Neighboring boys. Everybody's looking for work. You know how that was. And it's usually of course, once in a while there would be some outsider that Dad would hire, but he was a hard man to work for because he wanted it done right. Many times I can remember that he fired a man off the crew because they didn't do it as he had ordered it to be done. But once he threshed for someone, he always got the job back. He was very fussy with his threshing.
When you say he threshed for someone,
he had a threshing rig.
He had a rig that he took around?
Mm-hmm, of his own. In fact, through his lifetime, he had 2 of them. And he always never had problem getting men where others, we would always hear, oh, they fired this one, they can't get enough to run the crew today. But he never had that problem.
Why is that? If he could be very hard to work with?
He was very hard, but yet he was, the men just thought the world of him. I don't know, but he was hard. He would sleep outside at nights and getting his rig ready. He'd sleep under the separator, and he'd get up 4 o'clock in the morning and fire up and blow that whistle at 5 to wake all the boys. But he always had a crew. They respected him.
Oh.
And Mother, she cooked, for a lot of bachelors living around that had crops to be threshed, and they asked her to do the cooking for them.
So whose ever crop was being threshed had to furnish food for them, and she would then
do the cooking for them and serve. They'd come to the house. She'd say then so much a plate.
Because there was nothing going on at your farm at the time.
No, then she could do that.
Oh.
Because Dad was gone.
Was she paid for that then?
Only so much a plate. That's how they worked.
How much? Any idea?
She 25 cents maybe.
And the person, the owner, would furnish the food?
No, she furnished everything.
Oh, you mean she had to actually bring in the food?
Mm-hmm. She had to. Since she was living at this place, this neighbor down here just got killed last summer, but he's the one, for years she cooked for him, especially him, I remember. The crew would come over and she'd have it ready.
How many meals a day?
3.
All 3?
That whistle would go off in the morning and breakfast an hour later. They had to be at the table. That meant lunch in the forenoon, lunch in the afternoon. 3 meals a day and 2 lunches. For the crew of 30 men.
Okay, well, you said, okay, there's a breakfast, and there was like an early lunch and a late
10:30
lunch.
lunch. After coffee had to be to the field 10:30.
And then there was also a noon meal.
Noon meal. 3:30 lunch in the afternoon.
And
then supper.
Supper at what time?
Well, that depended on the weather was nice and
Mm-hmm.
clear. They thresh into 7, 8 o'clock. They saw it may rain the next day. Put in an extra couple hours.
Must have been hard to cook with all.
You bet it was hard
I
to
mean,
cook.
you wouldn't know when
Just
to
when
serve
they're
it.
coming in.
What kind of meals did she serve groups of men that large?
There's always that big kettle of potatoes to peel. There was all that vegetable, a big kettle of vegetables. And the meat was always prepared ahead, you know, a great big ham maybe. Nothing elaborate.
When you say the coffee had to be out in the
Big bread
fields, you
every
mean,
day.
did she have to take, was she responsible for bringing the food out to the men?
Well, if she could. If she couldn't, then they'd send in, maybe Dad would send in a man to hurry and pick the lunch up. But as a rule, I remember us walking out to that lunch many times.
What about the full meals? With all of the 3 main meals eaten back at the farm?
The house.
So they would break, go back,
Mm-hmm.
and...
They'd unhook their horses at their breast too, so
Sure.
they had to eat. So they just unhook their horses and jump in a rack and come to the house. Their meals.
How did 30 men clean up?
Outside.
I mean, what did
Washbowl outside. Sometimes right by the pump. They didn't even have hot water.
It's a lot of men to go through one washbowl.
Yeah. That's the way they did it.
How long did the meals take?
Well, Dad was allowed an hour to eat. Whether it actually took that long, I don't know, but things were ready, so when they came in, big bread every day and pies usually every day. Cake for lunch. That was the routine.
What time? Then your mother sounds like she spent the whole day cooking.
Yeah, that's all she got done.
And when did she start cooking? Before the whistle went off?
Oh, yeah. She
was always up and
up
working
at the
by
break of dawn.
5 o'clock whistle.
She had to get that bread going, you know. Yeah.
And then she would finish breakfast and start on the next meal.
I remember washing dishes the day around. When I got big enough so I had to do the dishes, I was washing continuously.
Was the fact that there was so much work involved, did she look forward to the threshing season with...
It really was exciting. We could say we didn't dread it. No.
You didn't dread it, that's what I was wondering.
No, we really looked forward to it. Because that was the yearly income. And that was a big thing. By that time the gardens were taken care of.
So your father then supplemented your crop money by renting out his machines and running the crews for the other neighbors.
Yeah. It was quite an asset to the income. Every
Must
year.
have been. And what did you do all during this time? Once you had reached a reasonable age where you might be able to help in some things, what kind of things did you do?
Peel potatoes.
Peel potatoes?
Boy, I'll never forget the kettles of potatoes we used.
How old were you when you started doing that sort of thing?
8, maybe 9.
Boy.
It was the yearly thing. Between that and watch the bread, get that wood in so that bread would be done. Those were the little things we had to do. Get that water to the house. Between Johnny and I, we carried water. And we carried water. You know, no running water in the houses.
What about your sister?
Yeah, the only thing Vi wasn't there through threshing like I was because she went to Bismarck to high school. September 1st she usually was gone. September was the biggest threshing. September, October.
Although she went there when she was a freshman?
Freshman, yeah. She was 13. I think she was 13 when she went.
So she would have only had a few years then, where
Yeah.
she would have helped out with the threshing. So, well, I'm always assuming that your mother was quite a good cook.
She was a plain cook, but she was a good
She
cook.
was good. Did she teach you how to cook?
She made us do it. In other words, to learn it. She did. At least I was.
She could use the help, and then
yeah.
at the same time you learned how to do it. Were there recipes that your mother specialized in, or things that she considered her best meals as such?
The only thing I can remember is her chicken dinners. I don't know. I don't know if there's anything special about them either, but we thought when it was time for Sunday chicken dinner, that was really it. And she could fix it good.
Was she a good baker?
The plain things, and her donuts were just super. I can always remember that. Nothing like these cake mixes you get now.
I imagine the men in the crews must have really looked forward to these meals then, probably.
Oh yeah, that way.
Good bread baker?
Very good bread baker. Great big loaves of bread. I'll never forget them. She was a good pie baker. They just used common ordinary. They don't use Crisco either like they did nowadays.
What did they use?
But her lard, rendered lard, But her pie crusts are just super. Everybody always said. Adele's apple pies, that's the crew one. They were super. So, but like I said, it was plain. It was nothing fancy.
Did she bake her bread any different than other people did? I mean, some people used. I remember Mrs. Hahn always used potato water.
Oh yeah,
and other people used other things. What about
Mother always used potato water.
Well, she did too.
Yeah, she always did that. You had to get that potato in there.
Was there a favorite food that your father would look forward to having?
Sauerkraut and spare ribs. Oh, he just loved sauerkraut. Mother made sauerkraut. Those days they had the cabbage.
Oh.
I can always remember that. He liked sauerkraut. And she would make sauerkraut. Those great big crocks, 5, 10-gallon ones.
You could eat them that a long time then. I guess
All winter. It had to last all winter.
Anything else?
And smoked hams. Oh, they used to smoke those old hams.
Anything else?